Good evening and welcome to this edition of POOP. This evening my guest is Diana Dierks, who is running for the 71st District Kansas Representative as a Republican. She is opposed in the primary by Mr. Tom Bell, and there is no Democratic opposition. So this is a very important race where the outcome of the primary is the final outcome for our local representation. And Diana is going to be talking to us about what she sees as the important issues in her race and the upcoming session of the Kansas legislature. Diana Dierks, welcome to POOP.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for your invitation.
You bet. First, let's talk about the parameters of your district, kind of like who can vote for you in this upcoming August primary. Roughly, what are the boundaries of your?
Well, actually, it goes to the south to Wayne, but then it also dips down to Magnolia in one part. Everything east of Santa Fe, north encompasses East Salina, which would be the hill, and then also four townships.
Yeah.
And one is Solomon Township, but does not include the city of Solomon. I know I have New Cambria. And the rest of it is pretty rural community, people who like living out in the country.
Yes, yeah. So, but a good segment of the Salina community.
Very much so,
yeah.
Yes.
And so if you consider yourself an East Sider for Salina, you'll want to be paying attention to this issue because this is to this race because it's an important race. And then I also like to talk about deadlines and datelines. And so if you want to vote in this race and make your vote count for Diana, you are going to be voting in the upcoming August 5th primary. If you are not registered to vote, you have until July the 15th, 2014 by 5 o'clock in the evening, and then you may vote in the primary for the party for which you are affiliated. If you are unaffiliated, that is, you have not declared any party affiliation with either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, then you can declare at election time that you want to vote on the Republican primary ticket. If you are registered as a Democrat, you cannot vote on the Republican slate of candidates. The deadline to change party affiliation was June the 30th, 2014, and that day has passed. So my goal for us is to talk about why would voters vote for you, Diana, and then we'll take a look at some of those anticipated issues in the upcoming legislative session. When you look back at this last session, what makes you the proudest?
Oh, wow. There were several instances that I felt just really proud. I think the big one was the school funding bill that I worked diligently and hard to try to convince some of the other representatives to vote against that particular bill. Serving on the Education Committee has been a heartfelt endeavor. I think that was the key committee. Also, I served on Veterans and was very honored to be a co-sponsor on a bill that would help our veterans who are now residing in the 2 veteran nursing homes. There had been a post-audit completed, and there were some deficiencies, and also a huge amount of money had just suddenly disappeared. And in changing that and co-sponsoring a bill that would actually make the oversight of those 2 veteran nursing homes a cabinet position. So that hopefully now the veterans will be receiving the care that they so well deserve. They have served our country, and it is our duty to make sure that their remaining days are as comfortable as possible.
And so does that include like the Soldiers Home in Dodge City? Is that one of those?
I believe that is, and then also the one in Winfield.
Really?
The 2 of them.
Good.
Yes, there had been in the post-audit, $7 million had just kind of poofed and went away. And on our Veterans Committee, we were not going to stand for that, so we put together this bill, and I was very honored to be a co-signer on that.
Is that federal money that comes down to the states for the administration of those 2 care homes? Or do you just, I mean, sometimes it's hard to know that.
There are some funding dollars there, but most of it, it's sometimes it's the veterans themselves, that are contributing. But it's just the fact that they are in probably the final home that they'll ever reside in, and they should be treated with respect and dignity for what they have done for us, and not to have received the proper care
Right.
that the state felt, and especially on that post audit, just was incomprehensible. So we decided we would propose that bill, and it did pass, and it was signed by the governor. Very happy.
Excellent. And actually, it's just when you're handling, whether it's state dollars or federal dollars or even somebody else's money, you should just always do it with a lot of fidelity to what you're trying to do there.
Exactly.
What work gave you, well, I think you probably already answered this. Talk a little bit about your first term, your experience of being a first-term legislator, the last 2 sessions. But what did you learn? How will you build on this knowledge to be more effective in the upcoming election or in the upcoming session?
Well, initially in the beginning, several of us, because there was a large freshman class, and I liked that for the first couple of weeks that I was a freshman again. Took me back to the high school days. But I knew the gravity of being a representative, that I had a lot of things on my shoulders because I'm representing the populace who reside in my district, the 71st district. And the very first day, and I entered the State House for the first time, I'm looking around, and I mean, it's an awesome experience just to walk into that chamber. And I'm just very quiet, and my husband made kind of fun of me because it's the first time he'd ever seen me that quiet. But I was reflecting that not only am I representing the 71st District, but collectively as a body in the House, we are representing over 2.8 million people who reside within our state. And the judgments and decisions that we make on any bill that comes across our desk will ultimately have some type of effect on them. And it's in my goal for those 2 sessions were to make sure that the benefits outweighed the consequences. So that was my goal as I made my first entrance into the State House on the floor.
It's kind of a big deal, isn't it?
It was beautiful. It was just wonderful. I can't express how proud I felt that people had enough thoughtfulness to put me into office and trusted my decision-making capabilities, that they entrusted really parts of their lives to my decision.
I don't think that we always understand how much state government impacts us, but probably some of the most day-to-day stuff that impacts us, like where our kids go to school, who teaches them, what resources they have with which to teach them, how many police officers we have on our streets, those things are often decided in the Kansas State House. So they're very, very important.
It is.
Talk a little bit about your learning curve as a first session legislator.
Actually, I just jumped in with both feet. The session is actually very short, short period. You have a certain amount of time to present any bills that you wish to bring forth, to present. And then they have the cutoff dates, and you have to have everything completed out of committees. So the first year, I think it's really imperative that new legislators learn the process quickly. So I just jumped in both feet, and I had some mentors, those who had served on the legislature for 2 or 3 sessions. Like-minded, more traditional common sense Republicans. We got together, and they were a great help to me. And I learned and I listened. And it was very important, especially some of the real intense bills that we were faced with. And they put me on the Education Committee, which the last 2 years has been one that spends a lot of time and effort. We don't just have an hour-and-a-half education meeting. We meet in the mornings, we met in the afternoons, we met late night, because we had bills that we need to, because education, it's all about the kids. And that, to me, was the most important thought in my mind when I read any legislation that was presented to me on the Education Committee for consideration, is what effect it's going to have on the families in my district and the kids.
And I think it's also, in terms of share of the budget, it's a significant piece, isn't it? It's like 40% of the budget is education?
Actually, 60% of the budget's education. It's a large percentage of it, and those monies need to be put into the classroom, the the continuation of our children's education. And it's not just K through 12. We're talking about on a budget, we're talking about higher ed, that our universities, KU, K-State. I visited with our KU classrooms here in Salina, and I don't think some people realize the importance of having the KU Med Center here, the KU Medical School, because those physicians who are being trained at the KU Med Center, they go out and serve. It's part of their regulation of being there, is that they have to serve a certain amount of time in the rural communities. And that affords our rural communities to have adequate health care, whereas some of their small municipal hospitals, sometimes they just have a clinic. But there's somewhere, and these doctors, I feel, gain as well in a multitude, because when you're in a rural community, you're delivering babies and, you know, a lot more where they can't get out to the big cities. So I think it's an excellent program, and on my palm card, I have on the back that we need to continue to support higher ed, keep the KU Med school here, and of course K-State is here. I think if you really look at Salina, we are the hub of education.
We have quite a bit of resources.
Right. A lot of people in Topeka feel that there's nothing west of Topeka. Well, there is something west of Topeka, and I'm here to testify to that.
And even then, you know, for a long time, Forte State University had the only bachelor's nursing program west of Salina. And so we're still a very important resource.
Right.
So, you referenced your palm card, and I'm sure that that's part of that. Why should voters vote for you?
Well, I think I bring several things to the forefront. First, I'm an incumbent, and I've already gone through the freshman orientation and the sophomore class. But you gain the knowledge on what bills that you really need to concentrate on and get those, and the bills that you need to also concentrate on, but you know that this bill is going to take more of your time, and it's a balance. Because I want to make sure that both bills have adequate study time, that I know how it's going to affect my constituents. And I don't do this simply myself. I have made it a point from day one to contact members of the community on how a prospective bill is going to affect the constituents. I call on Judge Helmer if it's judicial. I talk to Dennis Lawver when it's a Chamber of Commerce because I'm a great advocate for bringing businesses to Salina. I have a business background, and I'll explain that a little more in depth. Also, I talked to Bill Hall, the superintendent of schools for 305. I've also visited with Superintendent Proffitt, because even though that is more borderline on Representative Johnson's, it still has some effect, because there's still some kids in my area that attend there. So then when I have all the facts in gear, then I feel that I could make a more informed decision, and I have done that throughout both sessions, and it has been an invaluable tool, and at the same time keeps me in contact with my constituency and how they feel about things. I don't just, it's not my own personal agenda that I take to Topeka and say, by golly, we're going to do this because it's what I want. It's what my constituents want.
I know that the school administration felt like you were definitely in communication with them when that education bill was going through at the end of the session, and that was really greatly appreciated. When we were talking earlier, you described to me that there's a perception that there's very little difference between you and Mr. Tom Bell, your opponent. However, I was pretty impressed with your history as an independent businesswoman. So could you talk a little bit about that and how it impacts your outlook?
Well, I've been employed since I was 16. Always had some sort of a job. And I'm really proud to say that most of the positions that I've held have been as a private business person. And I think that might give me a little edge there, and I think it might even be a very big edge, because when we're talking about balancing a budget, the experience of, you know, keeping a business together, hiring people and supplying a workforce, which we have, with my husband, of course, is helping. We have added and given back to the community from which we extract our business. Yeah. And that to me is very important. So I don't have to guess how to balance a budget. If you don't balance a budget, you're no longer in business. And you go through the tough times. In the 80s, when things just fell apart, when interest rates went to 22%, there were a lot of entities in our community that went under, and they came to, you know, we all counseled each other, okay, what do we need to do to continue? I think the one, I have hospital background, social services. Our little municipal hospital in Harrington, we had residents, we had a non-acute skill level care nursing facility, but we needed or intermediate, I guess is what they would refer to it as, but we needed something that when we had somebody come to the hospital, I would have to find another location for that patient to be transferred to, because we could only keep them in skill level care a certain length of time. Yeah. So we instigated and had what we called a swing bed, and that way we were able to keep those patients there. And then we intervened and actually started a skill level care nursing unit so that families would no longer have to travel distances to be able to be close to their loved ones when they were in need of having those families around. And I think that was probably one of the most endearing positions that I held. But I have been a real estate broker now going on 15, 16 years. And even though we work for a company, we are all independent agents. And if I'm not out there working and talking with my clients, and if I don't sell something, it's just like being back on the farm. You know, you have to make your living. So that I think I bring to the forefront. And another thing I'll just touch on briefly is to me, there is always a human side of politics. The funding bill was a human side of politics. And I enjoy working with OCCK and the Ashby House. You know, I volunteered on numerous occasions with them. They've called me if they've had a crisis. And I think that brings the essence of sometimes women have more of the nurturing feel and can kind of relate a little bit to some of those issues. I think my proudest moment is when they brought some individuals and wanted to have their picture taken with me, and these were individuals at different ages that were with Down syndrome, but at different levels. And I tell you, there is nothing more rewarding than to have them give you that hug and thank them. Thank you for what we do for them.
Well, I think one of the things is that sometimes we forget that political ideation or political thinking and action, the root word of that is policy. And you're actually trying to create policy. And to me, it's appropriately viewed as policy written by people for people. It's a large society coming together saying, what can we do for each other? There are some things we can do for each other that are best done when we all come together in that way. And of course, you know, among people, there's going to be some disagreement on what's important, what's more important, what's less important. But that to me is the essence of it. Is that if politics loses its connection to that service piece, it just becomes power for power's sake, or it can be.
Well, I think people look at, you know, they always use the term politicians, you know, and they feel that
pejoratively.
Politicians are so far removed.
Yes.
Well, that's not what I want to bring to Topeka, and I was very adamant about that even when I first started to run, that when I go there, that connection between my position in Topeka And the position of my constituents is going to be first and foremost, that communication, that they can come and visit with me or let me know what's going on. And I've had several instances where they've contacted me, Diana, can you help me? And we found some sort of solution, or at least was able to get them to the appropriate policy making, the person who was in what committee that they needed to really visit with.
Sometimes that's what you need. You just need to know
Exactly.
the name. So I'm actually going to kind of move us on to education.
Okay.
And education, like we've already kind of alluded to, is a big part of what the Kansas legislature does. And what I'm going to do is run a video clip of my POAP colleague, David Norland, interviewing Mr. Bill Hall, USD 305 Superintendent, and Brandon Cheeks, KNEA Salina President. And basically in this segment, Mr. Hall is really describing the legislative act that kind of culminated the end of the session, that is often referred to as a school funding bill. And so I'm hoping that you have that queued up, and we'll just let you roll that, and then we'll talk about that segment.
Along those lines, then, what's interesting about this is, as when I do have folks that refer to House Bill 2506 as a school funding bill, in reality, I don't see it as a school funding bill. It has school funding in it, but they decided to come in compliance with the Supreme Court's order on equitability. They decided that they would use House Bill 2506 as the vehicle by which to meet the Supreme Court's order, and they did that.
And when we talk about equitability, Bill, explain a little bit about what that means among districts, right?
Sure, absolutely. Among districts across the state of Kansas. And a lot of folks, we have 286 school districts in the state of Kansas. And if you go to any part of the state of Kansas, and having been out in extreme western Kansas for about 16 years, and northwestern Kansas, I've been pretty much all over the state, I guarantee you every part of the state and every school district is different. They're different in terms of the demographics that they represent. They're different in terms of the property wealth that they serve.
Right.
And the fact that they're different creates inequitabilities within the system. Right. So the only way to level that playing field is that the state needs to provide additional funding for those districts who qualify to level that playing field, so that every child, doesn't matter if you're in Atwood in extreme northwestern Kansas, or liberal in extreme southwest, or Salina, or in the Kansas City, Kansas area, every student, every child in the state of Kansas should have the same opportunity for success. That's what that basis of equitability is based on.
And you know, I want to refer to a school district that sort of shares our common background, because we were both in southwest Kansas at one time. I was in Garden City at the community college there. But, and my point, let me make it real quickly, that equitability standard may change from time to time depending on the wealth of the district. So it's an adjustable thing.
Absolutely, it's a moving target.
Right.
And the problem that we've had with this is there were two areas that the court came in and said that the state, you have not fulfilled your constitutional duty because they had not funded what we call the local option budget. Now we have additional budget that we're able to raise locally with our taxpayers, a certain percentage of our general fund. For us, we have it max at 30%. So 30% of our general fund, we can levy an additional mill levy on our local taxpayers to raise those additional dollars. Right. The problem with that is if every district in the state of Kansas does that, those mills in one community raises a different amount of money than they do in another community because of the wealth. Exactly. And well, just to give you an example, in Ulysses, my prior district, one mill would raise almost $400,000. And that's a community of 5,000, right? In Salina and Saline County, a community of 50,000, one mill will raise about $400,000. You know, so those dollars in southwest Kansas will go much further than they will in Salina.
Per student.
Simply per student, simply because of the property wealth that's there. So that's the inequitability. And so the Supreme Court came in and said, okay, when you did not adequately fund the local option budget, you're now required to do that. And they directed them to put the dollars in the local option budget and spread it across the state to make sure that all districts were kept equitable on their LOB. The other one had to be the capital outlay. And capital outlay is a different mill levy that school districts can adopt by virtue of a resolution, and those are also equalized. In other words, again, a mill levy in one community is different than in another, or a mill in one community raises so much more than in another. So again, the state needed to provide additional funding to level that. Well, in 2010, because of budget cuts, they took that away. And that's what one of the bases of the suit was that you cannot take that away because it damages school districts or students in poorer communities.
Yeah.
So the court ordered then you have to reinstate the capital outlay funding, the state funding.
Right.
So in those two areas, they provided the equity. Now, in a larger issue, the Supreme Court said we don't have the right information to be able to make a decision, and that had to do with adequacy.
Yes.
And that's
That's a key point.
that's the big issue. That's
Yeah.
and that's the one that those 5 districts that had sued the state in the Gannon case really hung their hat on, was that adequacy argument. And the court held in that particular argument that that adequacy, that the lower court used the wrong determinant in making that decision, and rather they said that they knew.
That is what constitutes an adequate
Right,
education.
exactly.
for
What
our
is
kids.
it? Right. And what is a suitable education, and what should our students know?
Yeah, which is the key language in the
In the Constitution,
Suitable
absolutely,
education, right.
absolutely. And so because they said that they used the wrong measure, they remanded that back to district court for further review. So that's something that's still out there. I believe it will come back in a year or so. It's not over yet. So for the purpose of 2506, they followed the court's order. And they put in I believe about $126 million
Yeah.
into the school funding formula, specifically in those two areas. But in the process of doing that, they also took from other areas in the education funding to do it. It's not like they just did a direct transfer and said, okay,
Yes.
here's $126 million.
Yes,
Use it.
and I think this is also a key point. And so do we have
Absolutely.
figures on how much of that actually was given by the legislature to fund it and how much was kicked or pulled
Well,
from other parts of the education budget?
Absolutely. The total amount was $126 million. Out of that $126 million, there were a number of other reductions on the school finance formula. For instance, they reduced the at-risk weighting for part-time students. And at-risk weighting, students who qualify for at-risk are the students who qualify for free lunches. And so now they're basically saying that if you're a part-time student, or if you're a student who's 19 years of age or older, we will no longer give additional at-risk funding to the school district for those students.
And
Go ahead.
will that affect our kindergarten students since we're half-time students?
No, it says grades 1 through 12.
Okay.
Not kindergarten. So it shouldn't affect the kindergarten kids. But that was about $3.4 million there that they took out of a different part of the formula to fund the $126 million. They eliminated non-proficient at risk. Those are additional dollars that districts receive. It's for students who don't qualify for free lunches, but they're still not performing well on state assessments. So we receive additional funding for that to help those kids. They pulled those dollars away. And they also pulled away virtual weighting out of the local option budget. In other words, when you establish your local option budget, you no longer can count students in virtual programs to help establish that. So all told, that countered the $126 million. That was a reduction of about 11 or 12 million right there. And so, and plus they eliminated new facilities weighting for districts, which was important for us.
I'm sorry, facilities weighting?
New facilities weighting. And thankfully our bond issue passed recently.
Yeah.
But that would have been an issue for us moving forward because new facilities weighting is for any new buildings that are constructed as a result of a bond issue or even capital dollars, and you get additional new facilities weighting for 2 years from the state to help pay the operational costs.
So we lost that.
Well, as long as we passed the bond issue in April, we were okay. But after July 1, they're eliminating
we
it.
just scooted in
Under the line.
Okay, and I in reviewing that video, I just thought that Mr. Hall said that so succinctly, but he said a lot of information very quickly. And so this is the summation of what I heard him say, that the last session primarily dealt with the equitability aspects of funding, the suitability or adequacy issue, which is probably maybe even the more important piece, has been remanded back to the district court. So we'll probably see it come around in a year or two. Yes. And the new money, $126 million, primarily works to correct some issues of equitability, but about $11 to $12 million of that was funded through taking dollars away from other aspects of education funding. So some kind of moving around, but still a significant amount of new dollars, about $114 million. So do you think that fairly describes what happened? Do you have anything to add to that or to?
You mean the money amount?
Or just anything that he described about that bill, 2560?
2506.
2506.
Well, there were some other issues, as you know, in regards to that particular piece of legislation that has really made an impact on the educators of our kids. We had the House members and the Appropriations Committee had brought forth a bill that met all of the requirements of the Supreme Court. And it was passed out 91 to 24%, however many there were at that point. And we felt that, okay, we have met our obligation as far as that portion of the Gannon lawsuit was concerned. Then it went to the Senate and to a conference committee where 6 individuals kind of decide, you know, what are we going to change? And out of that came a very different bill. The numbers were still the same, I mean, meeting the requirements, but there were 3 policy pieces that had been inserted. And that is the one thing that I just could not understand, why at the midnight hour,
Right.
just like they did 2 years before that in 2012 when they passed the tax bill to begin with,
Right.
the tax bill, and now at the midnight hour, you want to put in 3 policy pieces, one of which the corporate tax credit
Yeah.
for the at-risk, you know, student.
Right.
They get a corporate tax break when they offer a scholarship to an at-risk student. However, I did not see, first of all, this bill was brought to us and these changes, one part of that portion involving the teachers wasn't even in writing. I mean, we didn't see it. We didn't have a conference on it. It had never been in a committee. Sitting on the education committee, I know we have sat through hours of conferees and their explanations of why a certain piece of legislation should be passed, why a certain piece of legislation should not be passed. Again, going back to the consequences, benefits that I mentioned earlier. Well, in that particular case, the teachers who happened to be at the State House that day in red shirts, boy, they were there in numbers, and I was so proud to see them, because these are the people who really take our children in their hands, and they are the mentors of those children. And parents take care of them in the home. The teachers make sure that these kids are going to be educated and move on to be productive adults at some point in time. They had never had an opportunity to be a conferee. And I felt that was, because we have this rules, even we have a rules chair. And if a bill in the normal process had come to the floor and had never been through a committee process, they would throw it out.
Right.
But since it's a conference committee, I guess no holds bar, you can do anything you wish. Well, you're taking a piece of history that was first initiated in 1957, giving the teachers due process.
Right.
Now, whether or not anybody is for that or against it, it was the process of which it was presented.
Right.
The teachers did not have an opportunity to say yay or nay. That could have been a separate bill at another point in time, but it was simply thrown in there and, of course, unfortunately passed.
Right. What's the third component? If one part is tenure and the second part is the corporate tax cut for scholarships for charters, do you know what the third component?
The third one was a tax break on property tax for those who wish to homeschool. God bless them, you know, for wanting to have their children at home and teach them, and I do an excellent job. I have nothing against homeschooling, but the thing is taking the public tax dollars and paying for private education.
Right.
And actually, I did a little study on that, and the State Department of Revenue, again, just wanting more information on this, the State Department of Revenue actually decided that it was unconstitutional. And I made that point clear in explaining why I was not going to vote yes on this bill. And it did turn out that it was unconstitutional. So they did take that piece out, but the other two
survived. Right.
And the corporate tax bill actually had been a separate bill. It had gone through the committee process the year before and was defeated on the floor. But now they brought it back in again. So yeah, it just wasn't good policy at all. And a lot of people say, well, if we didn't vote on it, it would have been worse. No, I think it would have had an opportunity to go back to the original I didn't care if I had to stay there through Sunday. You know,
Right.
they keep saying, oh, well, let's do this and we can go home. We are there to represent the people, not worry about our time frame as to whether or not we want to go home.
Right.
I didn't care if I had to stay there with a blanket and a pillow.
Yeah.
I would have stayed there to make sure that we had a bill that met the requirements, but yet did not put some consequences, again, especially on the teachers.
Yeah, and just, so kind of going back to the money piece of it, where will those new dollars, those 114 million new dollars come from?
Supposedly the budget, school funding budget, which of course you know, some are for the LOB, local option budget. Some of it comes from that, but primarily comes from the state. And you have your base rate plus you have some added additional things to it. The biggest problem is now with our state being with the revenue showing up as it does. We kept a real close eye on the revenues, and I have some numbers here. It was in April, the April state revenues were $93 million below the estimates. In May, they were $217 million below estimates, and in June, they were $28 million below estimates. And so therefore, that ended up with the state ending the fiscal year on June 30th, recent history, was $338 million less in revenues than had been planned. Now, the state cannot borrow money. If the federal budget's in dire straits, they can borrow. We cannot. So it has to take from one to the other. And in recent years, information from those legislators that have been there prior to my entering public service, they've always taken it from the Kansas Department of Transportation. We call it the Bank of KDOT anymore because that's essentially what it is. And what we are actually doing are operating on reserves. And as you can see, money has been shifted from one place to the other because that's what we have to do.
Right.
We cannot borrow. So it has to be, we'll take from Peter to pay Paul concept. And those deep cuts are jeopardizing our school financing. So the 2015 legislative session is going to be sitting down and figuring out where this money is going to come from and what needs to be done. Nobody wants to see raising taxes.
Right.
That might be an element. But we have to determine something needs to be done. When this new tax bill first was implemented back in 2012, if they had at least implemented it over a little bit at a time.
Right.
If you're buying something, you a little bit at a time. It's like an installment plan.
Right.
A little bit here, a little bit more until we get to where we want to be. Or you want to save something, you have a goal. A little bit here, a little bit here. You don't just take it out of some place, put it and hope you're going to pay your bills.
Yeah.
And that's in essence is what the government has done.
And let's kind of go back and just do a little background. Back in 2012, Kansas enacted tax cuts, and I'm quoting an article from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities from March of 2014. They said that Kansas enacted tax cuts that were the largest ever enacted by any state and have since held up by tax cut proponents in other states as a model worth replicating. In truth, they say here, Kansas is a cautionary tale, not a model. And so this was primarily a tax bill aimed at cutting income taxes, but primarily to LLCs. Is that correct?
And small corporations, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
I mean, you want to encourage these businesses to grow. It's just that you can't implement it all at one time. And there have been I've received some complaints from constituents that they had not yet received their income tax return because we knew that they knew this June 30th was coming and they wanted to show a little bit. But it's just unsustainable, and that's what happened. It's just unsustainable, and we are getting Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, all focusing on Kansas, which I think initially, if it had been maybe a little, the thought process was okay,
Right.
but the implementation needed some tweaking.
Well, one of the things that I mean, in looking back at this, even at the time that the bill was being discussed, there were grave concerns about the deficits that it would
Right.
that it would generate. But nobody really knew that there would be deficits or deficits in revenue collection until we got there.
Right.
And yet, it seems like kind of some of the worst predictions have come true.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
yes.
And I also found this article from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. I found it very interesting because it was written in March of 2014, and it expressed some concerns about the whole plan because they actually called it a rather, if your goal was to stimulate growth, they considered it to be a rather poorly targeted tax cut. At least this group of experts did. And so and I think you have the same resource, but deep income tax costs cause large revenue losses, and that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. And the large revenue losses extended and deepened the recession's damages to schools and other state services. And I thought that was kind of an interesting statement, and maybe somewhat moderated by the school funding bill. But I think that even if schools have been, even if they've been rescued temporarily with this with this cost infusion or cash infusion, other departments are hurting, and they list other departments such as colleges and universities, libraries, local health departments, parks.
Right.
All of those places are still hurting. They also state, and I don't know if you have any information on this, that the tax cuts delivered lopsided benefits to the wealthy. Have you heard any discussion about that?
I was just reading an article, it may very well be the same article, and their statement was Kansas tax cuts didn't benefit everyone. Most of the benefits went to high-income households. Kansas even raised taxes for low-income families to offset part of that revenue loss. And otherwise, the cuts to schools and other services would have been greater still. And this was from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities.
Yeah.
So it would be the same people. But this is a nonpartisan, public, just giving, they're doing their analysis and keeping us. And there are entities in Topeka that, we listen to when there is something like this, and they're all nonpartisan.
Right.
And we can go to there and get some questions answered before, and that also helps. And I can pass that on to the constituents, say, okay, this is what's really happening. And I send out a newsletter electronically 3 times a year, and then an in-session one to those who I have the email addresses of, and I keep them on top of what's going on, good news and bad news.
Yep.
I mean, you have, the one thing that you have to be is honest.
Right.
And whether it hurts or not, you have to let them know what the truth is. Yeah.
And so they also say this document says that Kansas tax cuts have not boosted its economy, and they talk about how we're pretty level on job growth and not really seeing increases in numbers of employment. Because there's probably, I believe one of the sources that I read kind of inferred that there's a lot of discouraged workers who have permanently dropped out of looking for work too.
Well, one of the premises that I ran on as well is job creation, but you can only create jobs if there are monies to get them. And in visiting again with Dennis Lauver, I says, what do we need to do to bring jobs to Salina? We have the interstates, we have the airport. I mean, with the longest, well, now it's the second longest runway in the world in the States, but at the time when Schilling was here, it was the longest. And we have railroad system. I mean, all the components are there. But one thing that he mentioned in Salina is that we have about $1/3 million that we could use to offer incentives for some of these larger corporations to come here. And I'm sure this new study group that they're proposing to bring on, and Dennis felt that that was a good idea that way, but he's pretty certain that the same end result is going to be there. Manhattan has over $1 million. Topeka has $5.1 million for incentives. And incentives, I mean, you know, if a large company wanted to come in and bring their company here, they send their site locators out, and they wanted to buy a section of ground over by the airport authority. Okay, most of these large companies in my investigating want to just lease it. So that means that the city, if they really wanted to bring them here and feel that this is going to be an opportunistic thing for our people who live here and create jobs, they're going to have to purchase that. Well, you don't have the money to do that. So whatever the calculated thought process in here by having all these coalitions coming in and studying, it still comes down to the money. Where do we somehow have to allocate some money for incentives to bring some of these major corporations. Now we are getting small companies, and I mean I am amazed at the growth of South Salina. From when I came here in '61, it was just the drive-in movie, and now you have these shopping malls and things, and that's excellent, and they are providing jobs, but not the high-paying jobs that some people need to raise a family of 4.
Right, exactly. And that's, and I'm kind of impressed because you've obviously been a small business person but have you yourself benefited from local incentives as a business person?
No, I haven't.
And I'm not criticizing that or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just that, I mean, I think incentives are kind of a double-edged sword. They are a cost-benefit ratio issue because one of the things that you may experience is that they come and they go.
Exactly.
You know? And sometimes I question their true commitment to our community.
Well, if they're not having to buy the land and they only have to lease it, once their whatever lease agreement that they have with that landowner or the city, whoever owns it, as soon as that's up, they can be gone. Yeah. So it doesn't really give you an essence of longevity. Right. That you can count on. Well, but look how long, you know, Swans has been here, and that's been a top employer. Phillips Lighting, you know, some of the other entities. So we do have some, but you know, I'm sure I wasn't here on the onset of why when they came here, whether or not they received incentives or tax breaks, but you know, that has to be in the whole big picture. It's part of what most communities our size do. Right. You know, exactly. It is just to bring them here. And so, one of the things that. What are some of the things that you hear the governor saying about this shortfall? I mean, I know from... Well, he was saying that it was because of Obama, I mean, the federal government, but that really, it's just kind of passing the buck. I have to be real honest with you. It's not really, the concept really isn't there, and I've read various articles and comments from individuals, and you have to live up. If you start something, you have to stick with it, and you can't pass the buck. Right. You just can't. And in this case, you know, if there was some part of it, perhaps, but not the majority of it. Right. And when you do that and you start something and initially, you know, I'm sure he felt that it was the greatest thing that could happen. You know, we're going to help these small businesses, and I would be, you know, say, wow, if we could just do that. But you also have to proceed with caution. Yeah. And that's what I do whenever I make a decision on a piece of legislation that crosses my desk. I proceed with caution until I am absolutely sure it's going to benefit my constituents and that they are knowledgeable of what's going on, and that those entities within my community are on board with it. One of the things that I've spent a little time doing, because it's not easy work, is I've tried to kind of parse out how tax cuts at the federal level and the state level have kind of tumbled down to the cities and the counties. And I actually
I actually intuit that that is maybe part of our local dysfunction, but it's really hard to trace those strands. It's really, really hard. But one thing that I did read from one resource is they said that everything about our tax infrastructure is incredibly interrelated. And so if the feds do something and that reduces a funding stream, and the states reduce the funding streams.
Right.
You know, when you're at the end of the stream, which is where the cities and the counties are located,
Right.
it can get pretty tough. And they said, alternatively, sometimes states can do things that are counterproductive against something the feds have tried to do, and I'm sure it happens both ways.
Well, a lot of the programs are do have some federal dollars, Upstart or whatever, depending on the project. But initially, it's going to be in the lap of the recipients to continue and then find their own funding.
Yeah.
And, there are grants. I'm sure there are grants. And again, it just depends on what kind of entity that they initiate. But, for the most part, I think anyone who really starts a business knows that those funds could very well just evaporate.
Right. But, and I think especially education has seen kind of their share of, we're going to give you a starter grant, then you have to find your own local funding. And that, that can be very fatiguing. It can, I think it is a good hand up for a business that is at some point expected to become profitable. But I don't know that you can expect that of some government services. I mean, we don't expect at some point that our police department will become profitable. We don't expect at some point that our fire department will become profitable.
No.
And so it can be very difficult, very challenging. So I think we've asked this question, but I'm going to kind of just go at it one more time. What do you think are the options that the legislature will have when facing this budget shortfall? In today's Salina Journal, they project nearly a $338 million shortfall. So that's a...
Well, obviously, they're going to have to revisit the budget. We passed a 2-year budget, 14 and 15. And on the onset of 15, they're certainly going to have to go back and review. They're going to have to make some alterations. There are going to be some cuts. And the thing that just concerns me greatly are the cuts are going to be to those services to people who can least afford it. We have some social entities out there, the seniors, you have the developmentally disabled, you have those individuals who need some care. We have programs that we are taking those individuals that perhaps cannot get a job on the outside in a normal type of industry, but still can be productive.
Yes.
And give them a sense of person.
Right.
Those are the types of, like OCCK is marvelous at that, and they work with these people. And those are the types of services that really, I'm very concerned, are going to be at least cut back on.
I know.
And that means loss of facilities, loss of personnel, and the inadequacy of not being able to help them. And that, to me, is what really concerns me. One
of the programs that in my career I've had contact with is a waiver program, and it's called the MRDD waiver. And it is a waiver that grants a medical card, or I think can care, plus other services that OCCK offers, including respite care, which for some families with special needs children is just an incredibly important requirement. And so, we always see, huge waiting lists to get onto MRDD. And I always say that MRDD is like water. And when you're thirsty, you should be able to get a drink. And so when the community has that need, and not that any government can be everything to everybody, but that is actually a pretty proven model of cost-effective care for clients. The other thing that at least one of my resources that I read said that that something that's really being hit by this tax cut is supports for families living in poverty. And again, as somebody that works within the school district, that's something I see quite a bit of. And they said that the number of poor children and parents receiving income support from temporary assistance for needy families, which is TANF, has declined by 41% since 2012, a much greater than the 12% decline in TANF recipients nationally. So we're seeing that some of our neediest Kansans have fewer resources that are available to them. So, it's, I mean, I think one of the things that maybe I want my legislators to know is that I know that budgets have been cut. And you can cut fat, and you can even cut a little muscle, but when you get to bone, you're hurting infrastructure. Right. And so, so do you look for there to be the energy or the courage to look at some sort of adjustment to this income tax plan?
Well, if you're spending more than what you're bringing in, I mean, that's just not good business at all. I don't care what level you are. In my 30 years of actually hands-on my own business, and it's been in different aspects, you know, from farming to working with international markets and promoting American-made products to Canada and Mexico, to being a realtor. I have that background, so to me that kind of gives me that edge of at least being more knowledgeable on how we have to handle money. But if you start spending even a household budget,
right,
where the mom and the dad, you know, they have to set up a budget, and if you don't have the money to go out to eat, then you eat rice and beans or beans and rice.
Yeah,
but you do it to get through. And I think that we need to be, as a government, in a state government, they need to start being more frugal, but looking at areas where it's not going to hurt the populace that are already getting less and less, because that populace is growing. Even in Salina, unfortunately, we are getting more and more at-risk kids.
That's right.
That are on free and reduced lunches, and it's just simply because of the economy.
It is.
And you know, they say that we're coming out of the recession very, very slowly, but we are not making any headway from pre-recession times.
Right.
We're not making the headway state-wise, and this is something that's going to be a serious, concentrated effort on behalf of the legislature, House leadership, Senate, that they're going to have to be able to figure out where they can cut spending.
And are they going to be courageous enough to do the next half, to look at our tax structure?
Well, that would be my hope, because they're going, you know, whether it's maybe cutting back on the amount of tax that they can not have to pay taxes on, you know, the money that they make.
Right.
You know, that could be maybe go back to what they should have done initially, done it in increments, and say, hey, you know, guys, we will give you a tax break, which I think as a small business, you would be grateful to have that. And I'm sure that those who are in business realize the predicament that our state government may be in financially, and realize, you know, hey, if I want to stay in business, because we are certainly at this point not bringing companies in. You know, they say we're bringing all these people in. They are actually operating on the Missouri side of the state line and having their business in Kansas.
Yeah.
But they're spending their money in Missouri. That's where a lot of that outlet is. Now, we do have some spread over the state, but the populated areas is who are really benefiting from it. And if they are a good business person, they should realize that they're going to have to maybe take more of a reduction in the amount of tax credit they're getting to keep our state operational.
And fiscally sound.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I, as a business person, would say, hey, you know, I got to save $20 last year, I'll save 10.
Yeah.
Just to
Yeah.
get it. And then eventually, when we see that things are growing, and even a small tax cut should be an incentive to most businesses who want to start up. And that's what you want to encourage, are people who live here to have their businesses in their hometowns, to promote their hometowns and grow the Kansas that we know.
I read, in some of the reading that I did, I read a really interesting comment that kind of one of the things they said is that people who are small business people are often a small business person by choice.
That's right.
Because they want to set their own schedule, they want to be their own boss, and they don't necessarily want a passel of employees under them. And so they said that sometimes is a fallacy of small business as a grower of employment. But still, you've got to make it worthwhile for people to be in business. One last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about is that I looked at a Lawrence Journal World article saying that the governor met with legislative leaders to okay shifting money from other accounts. And that's, from what we've talked about, that's a fairly common thing. I mean, it's what they have to do. And this is a June 19th article. And I think one of the biggest things I read in this article is that it became a discussion of whether this taxation scheme is working, and the governor, of course, said that it did. But in fact, it says here that the internal borrowing last year was $300 million, but at this last session, they shifted $675 million. And so I'm thinking of your Bank of KDOT comment. But do you see that? Do you see that as not a good sign, or is this about the time of year we end up doing that kind of shift?
Well, that is a real difficult question to answer, because that, I think a person would almost have to have a crystal ball. I'll be real honest with you.
Right.
If we had not entered into the unsustainable tax bill that they did in 2012, we wouldn't be faced with this dilemma.
Right.
And secondly, whether or not they had always been shifting that much money around, but what a lot of us who sit there on the House floor, when we came up with the funding tax bill, and a lot of things were being discussed, I think it was a consensus of opinion that we right now are really operating on our reserves.
Yeah.
It's like having a piggy bank in the closet, and you have to pay a bill. You hope you have enough money in the piggy bank to pay it.
Yeah.
But pretty soon you're going to run out of piggy banks.
Yep.
And that's what we're running out of. We're running out of areas to take this. And
Yeah.
KDOT has always been hit the hardest. And unfortunately, that's true. But my fear is that we're going to lose the funding for the higher education, the K through 12, the education end of it, because those are the individuals who are going to be working here in the state of Kansas, and they are preparing themselves to enter into the workforce and be our future doctors and our teachers and those business people, and maybe they would have at some point the insight of how we can create a state where people want to rush to. We have a lot to offer here, but those states who have started doing some of those tax cut things, they have tourism or the oil industry. They have other avenues of revenue of which we do not.
Yeah.
We are small communities, major cities in some areas, Wichita, the east part of the state, and we have agriculture.
Yeah.
And agriculture has always been our biggest asset for Kansas. And we are hoping we bring tourists through, but a lot of people say they just drive through and go to Colorado.
Right.
We don't have the mountains, so tourism isn't one of our biggest income producing, so we have to look at other avenues, and we have to look at it very closely, and I'm sorry to say that we have to look at it very quickly.
Yeah, because it's coming up.
It is.
And so I think we've been at this for a while, so any final words or any topics that you want to talk about that we haven't yet spoken about?
I feel that this has been very, very comprehensive. I'm just hoping that those who view this can really fully understand, the unsustainability of what happened. We knew about it 2 years ago. We want to do job creation. I'm sure, that my opponent has some thoughts about job creation. But again, job creation all boils down to where the money's going to come from.
Yeah.
And also, if we don't, we will start losing our labor force. And they will go to places where they can get a job and make the money to raise their family. And we do not want that. I do not want to see this migration going out. I want to see migration coming in, because this is home. This is home base for a lot of us. And we want to make sure that that remains. So the 2015, I am hoping that my constituents send me back to Topeka, because I have been working on this, and I've been working on the education, and I have the 2 years experience. And at this point, when we have a crisis situation, it's going to take those who have some knowledge in regards to exactly what formats have been initiated, what we've tossed out, that the school finance bill was probably about the 6th rendition of it before even that one came across, because there's bits and pieces, and it's a commitment. This is not a position where you're there from January through April and take a couple weeks and then close out in May. This is a everyday 2-year obligation, which I'm very proud to have been able to do. And I work very hard at it. And I have been out knocking on every single door, listening to those individuals. I know my driver, my husband says, most he was in 30 minutes that time.
Yeah.
But they want to know.
Right.
And that's a good thing.
Right.
And I am very grateful to be able to have an opportunity to sit and visit with them.
Sounds great. I am going to just reiterate some days. The primary, the important day for Diana Dierks is Tuesday, August the 5th. That is when the primary is. Vote in that so that we can get the kind of representation that we want, whether you're voting for in this race or another race. It's just important to participate, because these are important times in our communities and in our state and our nation. You also must be a registered Republican or an unaffiliated voter to vote for Diana Dierks in this race. I'm also going to make sure that we'll put up any websites, any contact information, because it is certainly in talking with our candidates that we learn more about the issues and how we look for them to answer the problems that face us as a state. And so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and I would just reiterate, it is so important. Just get out and vote. We really certainly need the voter turnout, because this is going to be a very important election.
So August 5th, see you then.
Thank you.
Thank you.